Thank you. Okay, guys, have a seat, please. There we go. Okay, gentlemen, have a seat, please. Thank you. I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Is a gentleman named Seth Graer. Is the mic on? Can you hear me? I'm told the mic, there we go. Sorry, now that's better. I'm introducing Seth Graer, who's our speaker today. Seth is the CEO of a company called Lightbridge, and he's going to explain what they do, and all I'm going to say is that they're in the nuclear technology, nuclear energy, nuclear fuel innovation business. One can always ask on these, and why should I care exactly about that? And I think if the reason isn't obvious to you, let me just say the following, that you think of this energy business, our demand for energy in the world is probably insatiable. And, we've had fossil fuels for years, and they're quite dependable, but there's issues with cost and variability and environmental climate risks. On the other extreme, renewables have been very popular, fashionable, and growing for the last 10 or 15, 20 years. And they're promising, but they also have some issues with supply and dependability and infrastructure systems which are yet to be really fleshed out. So somewhere in the middle of that model or paradigm lies nuclear energy, which has also been around quite a long time and was quite successful, and then hit a trough or perhaps a down period, I call it, largely due to safety concerns. And what Lightbridge is doing is going right after those issues, as well as cost and how to use both existing infrastructure, meaning reactors, or new ones. And I think that's quite fascinating, because where I started was we need a lot of energy, and that's not going away. So without further ado, please welcome Seth Graer. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry, and thank all of you for coming. It was very interesting sitting through some of the updates, which were all fantastic and amazing, seeing the images here of the Native American art from Curtis. When I got here, I parked at the back and walked to the front and saw the sign, the space for speaker parking, just as it was starting to rain. And I figured, I better walk back through the rain and move the car, or people arriving will think there's no speaker today and they're not going to come in. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at the Senior Men's Club of Stamford. And then I got a call from Jerry saying he heard about that and wanted to know if I would speak here. And then I got a call for another talk upcoming at the New Canaan Exchange Club, and asking if I would talk there. So there's something in the water around here of people interested in nuclear power, which I'm glad to hear about and glad to come and talk to people. And I'll use these slides a bit and mostly, just talk over them and be interested in hearing your comments and your questions. I'll say that, let's see, this is working. Not sure, there it goes. So as Jerry mentioned, Lightbridge is the company where I'm CEO. It's a small publicly traded company on the NASDAQ stock exchange. And the company was formed around the idea of developing a new type of nuclear fuel for the existing reactors or for new ones. And really, for the first time, reimagining, redeveloping the fuel from scratch using modern metallurgy, modern technology to make it perform a lot better, be safer, than the original fuels, which are these pellets of uranium stacked in a zirconium metal tube called a fuel rod. If we could reimagine that, which we did as a solid rod with different zones within it, with uranium, with zirconium, to improve the economics and the safety of nuclear power and bring other benefits. And I thought I had everything I needed to launch this effort, except one thing: tens of millions of dollars. So there was talk of a nuclear renaissance at the time, and that countries that never had reactors might get them. And I thought there was a need for a business to exist in the world that didn't, which was advise countries that never had reactors how to get them. And it's a good thing nobody was in that business, because they wouldn't have had any work for 30 years, since China and Romania were the last countries to get reactors that never had them before. And the big companies like GE couldn't really go into that business line, because one of the things you'd have to do would be help set up a nuclear regulatory authority for independent regulation. You can't regulate yourself. So we looked around the world at where we thought would make sense for the first country to advise. And we decided the United Arab Emirates needed a nuclear power program. And through a connection at Imperial College London, we managed to get to leaders of that country and proposed this idea. And we were hired to help with some feasibility studies. And then we led writing the entire strategic plan for nuclear power for the country and helped guide them through implementing it, which got us the tens of millions of dollars in fees to launch the nuclear fuel effort. I was in the UAE last month at COP28, the UN Environmental Conference, and they're about to open their 4th reactor in March. That will provide 25% of the country's electricity coming from nuclear. Between nuclear and renewables, the United Arab Emirates has had the largest reduction in carbon footprint per capita in the history of the world in peacetime. And part of the reason for the nuclear program is that the UAE thinks it might run out of oil in the coming decades, or for other reasons, people might just not want to buy the oil. And they need to diversify their economy. So instead of burning it up at home, they're selling more of it by building these nuclear reactors. And they're using the revenue to diversify their economy very successfully. And you'll see that in the cities of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, many thriving industries. And the nuclear power program has been a real part of transforming the country, where little girls are studying to be engineers and astrophysicists. That would have been unheard of 15 years ago. And the country has really done so much to become leaders in technology now, not just consumers. And I think this is part of what's helped lead to the Abraham Accords with Israel and neighboring countries, and in general, a real transformation of that country. And countries that are rich in energy tend to have higher education standards, better health care. They tend to have people more economically better off. You just can't do these things without an energy-rich life. I'm going to call your attention to our safe harbor statement. And I think I have to click twice is the key. Okay. So what's coming to be accepted at the UN Framework Convention at Climate Change and other groups around the world is that to meet climate goals, there has to be growth of nuclear power within the diversified energy mix. And without growing nuclear power, it doesn't add up that everything else can meet the goals. And I'd say at this time, even stronger than climate change, there's something else propelling nuclear power now, more than the concern for climate change around the world, and that's energy security. As our allies, particularly in Europe, want to wean off paying Putin for his fossil fuels, which is paying him to have the war in Ukraine. It turns out all over the world that people who depend on another country for their fossil fuels tend not to like that other country and don't really want to depend on it. And I see this in Southeast Asia. I see this all over the world of countries that are looking at nuclear power now are partly doing it because they just don't trust the country supplying them with fossil fuels. And this was already happening in Europe to some extent before the war in Ukraine. Some people were getting more and more concerned that Germany leading Europe to rely more on the pipelines for natural gas from Russia, that Germany was arguing with mutual dependence with Russia that will ensure the peace, that will ensure Russia needs the money from us, we need the gas from them. That didn't work very well, and I'd say it's pretty naive. And energy independence is extremely important, including for the United States. And so what we have in the world are, you could think of it as about 400 reactors of the size that are at Millstone. So 2 of them are there. So about 2 out of 400 of the large reactors in the world are not that far to the east of here at Millstone, Connecticut. And those types of reactors comprise most of the reactors in the world, almost all of them. And there's a growing trend toward what's called SMRs, not a trend in actually being deployed, but in countries developing them. And you probably heard, about some of this in the news about all these companies that are developing small modular reactors, and that they will have abilities to do things that the large ones don't, such as with an advanced fuel like Lightbridge is developing, go up and down in power to load follow to balance with renewables on a zero carbon grid when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, and will have lower capital costs to deploy. So there's also a large number of industries, including, for example, in the tech companies, the data centers, that are starting as industries to commit to decarbonizing. And you'll hear these statements out of Microsoft and out of other companies, and they're very seriously looking at these small modular reactors to hook up to their data centers. But there's also an energy security reason for doing that. The data centers are critical national infrastructure. If they go down, everything goes down. Food distribution stops. Gasoline won't pump. Nothing will work. And having them relying on the electric grid is actually a vulnerability for a cyber attack or a physical attack on the electric grid, having a multiplier effect across the economy as the data centers go down. So taking them off the grid and having them have their own small reactors actually reduces vulnerability as well. So this is an artist's rendering of what one of these small modular reactors might look like. This is from a firm called Gensler. And these reactors, at least, based on the designs that are going on, could have evacuation zones that are literally just to the perimeter of the site. That if you live across the street, you want to be in an evacuation zone. And, these could be very close to the facilities they're operating at. Dow, for chemical plants along the Gulf Coast of Texas, is looking, for example, very seriously at a series of these small reactors for their chemical plants, And as you know, in Texas with storms, they sometimes lose power. But these reactors will be able to operate through that. So as I mentioned, one of the benefits of the Lightbridge fuel in these types of reactors could be load following. And what's interesting is we're seeing, along with increased interest in nuclear power in the world, some less interest in renewables. And I think you're going to need both. But for example, France a couple weeks ago announced a large number of new big nuclear reactors that they're going to build. In addition to having 58 operating large reactors in the country and one under construction and 6 announced new that they're going to build, it looks like they'll build 8 more in addition to that. And this is a country that already gets 3/4 of its electricity from nuclear, and it's going to go more toward 100. And I would argue that France saved the West, that when Russia invaded Ukraine, the French nuclear fleet, even though it had some problems at the time and some of the reactors weren't able to operate all the time due to maintenance issues, that France still exported energy to neighboring countries, enabling them to buy less from Russia and be less vulnerable to Russian cutting off supply during the winter when they're most vulnerable. And had France followed Germany's model, where Germany had shut off and closed down all of their reactors and had an energy model for increasing reliance on Russia, had France followed Germany with that big an economy, I would argue Europe would not have been able to get through the winters without making a deal with Russia. And that France made what I would say is the right decision. And there was no other choice other than nuclear that could have gotten them through that. And what's interesting is with this new announcement from France in the last couple weeks, part of the announcement was they're dropping their renewables pledge. France now has no more pledge to increase renewables, only a pledge to increase nuclear. In a country that's already 75% nuclear for its energy. One of the examples of what you could do with these small reactors, especially the ones that can operate at higher temperatures, is you could produce hydrogen. And there's a lot of interest in hydrogen, but you need a lot of energy to produce it. Hydrogen's all around us. It's the H in H2O. And all you have to do is split that off from the oxygen atoms and you have hydrogen. The problem is it actually takes a lot of energy to do that. And, but if nuclear reactors could be used economically to produce hydrogen, hydrogen could become the base of zero carbon liquid fuels that could be used to decarbonize hard to decarbonize sectors like aviation fuel, heavy trucks, trains, cement production, steel production, plastic production, and ammonia. And ammonia is the basis of fertilizer and virtually all of our food. So these are very important areas. Now, when I talk about these small modular reactors, there are actually over 80 of them being developed in the world. This is a group of them that we selected, not for you to read what we wrote here. It's one of our internal charts, but just to show you that there's a lot of them. They're all different. They all have different pluses and minuses. Some are doing better than others. For example, the first one on the left, Voyager reactor from NuScale Power, says their first customer site would be UAMPS, which is Utah Associated Municipal Power System at INL, Idaho National Laboratory. But you might have read in the news recently that UAMPS is not going to go forward with that contract. So NuScale is still bidding in Romania, in the UK, but this is a very dynamic picture. Anything you look at is always changing with all these reactors competing with each other all over the world. And we've put in our own kind of editorializing, some red, yellow, green of where they stand in different areas. But for the most part, they fall into two different categories. The ones on the left, from NuScale, from GE Hitachi, from Carey, the Korea Atomic Research Institute, from Rolls-Royce in the UK, from Holtec in the US, those are smaller versions of the current types of reactors, like what you have at Millstone. So the technologies are very well understood, the regulators know them, but with more advancements in the design and in the plant, could use a fuel like Lightbridge is developing. And the ones to the right, from X-Energy, from TerraPower, which is Bill Gates's company, Kairos Power, Terrestrial Energy. These are what are called advanced reactors or Generation 4 reactors, which are actually old reactor ideas started at Idaho National Laboratory or under the Rickover program in the Navy or others decades ago, but brought back to life now to see if they could be commercialized. And many of them are very, very different from each other. So licensing or getting advanced on one of them might not help the others, whereas the ones on the left tend to be more similar and in the same boat in some ways. And the ones on the right will produce the higher temperatures, which would probably be better for producing hydrogen. Personally, I think that the orders now that you're seeing in the world, like what I described in France, a similar announcement recently in the UK, and other announcements in the last few weeks around the world of new reactors being deployed, are none of these. It's these large reactors of the current type, like at Millstone, the more current versions of them, but basically the same technology. And these, I think, are becoming more niche products, like we're talking about Dow's chemical sites or data centers, that at least for now, the cost per unit of electricity from the big reactors is lower. There's an economy of scale with the concrete, with the steel. The bigger the reactor, the lower the cost of energy. And these smaller ones are more premium products, at least right now in the designs, where the cost per unit of electricity they generate or energy through process heat or high temperature steam is a little more expensive than the market price. And the people interested in them, at least now, are interested because they're willing to pay a little bit more for the energy security aspect of it, for the decarbonization aspect of it. There's something else they're willing to pay for, whereas I don't think you'd want to pay for a higher electric bill to get your energy from Millstone. But good thing those big reactors can compete, at or below current market price on the energy production. One of the areas that in particular is being looked at by the US government through the Department of Energy is the coal to nuclear transition. And one of the companies on the last slide, TerraPower, in particular, is looking at Kemmerer, Wyoming, which has had some coal plants close and others slated to close, and open nuclear reactors, these smaller reactors in that community. And it's very interesting. The Department of Energy in Washington did a study, and they found that 80% of the retiring and operating coal power sites have the basic characteristics to be the sites for these small modular reactors. That's 190 sites. If you deployed on each of those sites, it would be twice as much energy as currently produced by nuclear power in the US. So if that were all to happen, it would triple nuclear power in the US. And one of the reasons you would want to deploy there, in addition to the jobs, the employment, as these coal sites are closing, and it's very important to these communities to have the energy and have the jobs producing the energy, is that there are cost savings from deploying a small modular reactor on a coal plant site. That could be from 15 to 35% savings from just putting it on that site. You already have sites with cooling water nearby with the underground piping for the water intake, the water outtake. You have an electrical switch yard. You have the electrical grid at the site. One of the problems with renewables is you gotta connect, by wires to get the electricity from the wind or the solar into the grid. You already have that at the coal sites. And for some of the small reactors, you might even be able to use the turbine from the coal plant. So there's a lot that's offered at these sites, and a big attraction in Virginia, in many other states, is the employment and not devastating these communities. And there just doesn't seem to be too much interest by any other industry to coming to these communities and doing big projects, employing a lot of people as the coal plants close, except from the nuclear power industry. So I think over time, with state support, you're going to start seeing some of these communities get small modular reactors, and I think that potentially could be tied to facilities that want to use that amounts of constant power, be it a data center, a military base, a hospital, an oil refinery, something else that's critical infrastructure. So as you know, the world's energy use is growing, and it's growing quite dramatically, like United States worth of energy needs that are being added around the world. Some of this is also being driven by more electricity demand within the energy mix, such as places where they're switching to electric vehicles. Things that are already electric, like data centers, as they're switching to artificial intelligence systems, are using much more electricity than before artificial intelligence in the data centers. Heat pumps are big uses, and we're seeing governments driving demand for these systems by giving tax breaks for things like electric vehicles and heat pumps. So how do we produce all this added electricity and meet our energy security goals, meet our allies' energy security goals, meet our climate goals? And that's part of why I say nuclear has to be part of that mix that achieves meeting those goals. There's a tremendous potential for the nuclear power industry. So you could think of nuclear as having 400 large reactors in the world, averaging about 1,000 megawatts electric each, about 1 gigawatt each. So about 400 gigawatts of nuclear in the world. 2 of them at Millstone, not far from here. And at COP28, the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change last month in Dubai, and I was there, many countries, including the United States, committed to tripling nuclear power by 2050 as a part of meeting their climate goals and their energy security goals. So if we were able to keep all 400 large reactors operating until 2050 and beyond in the world, 93 of which are in the US, we'd have to build an additional 800 of them to meet this commitment. That's just a massive build out of nuclear power. And if they're small reactors, then by numbers, we're talking about thousands and thousands of reactors, maybe more than 10,000, depending on how small you get. But this is a massive amount of nuclear power that the world is looking for as part of a decarbonized and secure energy production grid. And whether the nuclear industry will be able to step up and do this is a question, but we're starting to see good signs right out of the gate, like since COP28 last month, these announcements from France, from the UK, from Sweden, from many other countries already just in the last month, announcing their new commitments and linking it to this triple nuclear power globally commitment in the world. And for all the companies in the supply chains, from fuel to training to everything it takes to deploy large numbers of reactors, these systems are going to pull from global supply chains. US suppliers are already gearing up for for providing goods and services for new nuclear reactors all over the world. Now, could the small modular reactors play a big role in this? Could they overcome the economies of scale issue of big reactors have a lower cost per unit of electricity they generate than the small ones? And there's different analogies you could look at for inspiration how this could be done. One of them is aircraft. So before the U.S. entered World War II, the U.S. produced fewer than 3,000 military aircraft a year, fighters, bombers, and trainers in 1939, going into 40, leading up to December 7th, 1941. But by 1944, total output was over 96,000 planes, military planes in the U.S. And the U.S. produced over 300,000 military aircraft in 4 years that it deployed to the war effort, starting from fewer than 3,000 per year. And many of these were because of a change from craftspeople hand assembling aircraft to mass producing them in factories, many of which had been Ford assembly plants for vehicles repurposed for planes. And people describe it almost like a miracle. You would see parts being delivered into one side of the plant, and off a strip out of the other end of the plant, an airplane would take off. Then another one, then another one, then another one. The production was just staggering of these planes going off to the war effort. And it turns out these small modular reactors are about the size of these aircrafts. And they're actually about the complexity of these aircraft. And could you hone the design that you start producing them in factories and shipyards where the M in SMR becomes the key word, the modular aspect of them, modularity? Could you make them like aircraft and produce them by the thousands, and by that, sort of the economies of the many of mass production, like what happened with the Model T versus the hand-built cars? Could you bring down the costs? And a lot of these companies are betting they can and think they can, and they're putting a lot of resources into doing that. And if they can, you would need a lot more small reactors than big ones, but potentially you could get there, like the aircraft in World War II. Other people might look at prefab housing and say it's never really caught on as more than a niche aspect of the new home market. Are the small modular reactors more like that, and will not have such a staggering economic advantage that you'll still be better off building them at the site and then not get as many advantages of large-scale deployment? So to be determined. There's a lot of good companies working on this, from GE to Westinghouse to many others. So this is a picture from over at COP28. I gotta say, the nuclear industry is getting better at marketing. There was a wall for where the tripling nuclear pledge was signed. And John Kerry from the US delegation was the first speaker. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, spoke. Rishi Sunak was there, the prime minister of the UK. There were leaders from around the world. And this wall saying tripling nuclear energy by 2050 made it into the press around the world as the backdrop for the signing of this commitment. And there were a lot of other pledges for nuclear at COP28. There were 198 parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, including the United States. And all 198 unanimously agreed to the final statement and to commit to it. And for the first time ever in that final statement, it included nuclear power as a way to achieve climate goals by 2050. The only technologies ever previously mentioned specifically and agreed to by all the parties are wind and solar, renewables, but now it's also nuclear. And what's interesting is what was not included, despite some people pushing for it, hydroelectric was not included. And I think that's partly because dams aren't doing so well now in a lot of places. And there's a lot of people who feel it's kind of tapped out, that a lot of the places you could have a dam, you already do. Carbon capture and sequestration was not included, despite the fact that many leaders from the host country in the UAE wanted it included for using fossil fuels, but with carbon capture, that they could be okay. But no, that was not agreed to, but nuclear was. So this is a bit of a change, and it's partly because of the political landscape shifting. And I think at the same time as a lot of technologies are coming out too that can make nuclear power safer, more acceptable, more non-proliferative. But certainly Russia's invasion of Ukraine has energized this industry like never before. And I don't think you'd see, in particular, all these European countries like Sweden with these massive new nuclear power commitments in the last few weeks, but for realizing that without that, they're not going to be able to meet their future energy needs and not rely on Russia. They've really got to make a change. We're seeing a lot of reactors that were slated to close having their licenses extended and not closing, including in California, of all places, where even Gavin Newsom, who led efforts to help close the reactors, is now a leader of keeping them open. We're seeing reactors that closed that companies are working to bring back, like in Michigan, where there's a reactor, Palisades, that has closed that Holtec owns and is looking to restart, as well as put small modular reactors on the site. The European Union, through the European Commission, designates what are green energy sources, which is extremely important because they get financing and tax breaks that non-green energy sources don't. And now Europe has designated nuclear as a green energy source. That would have been unheard of 10 years ago. Japan is not only reopening reactors with new, better regulations, some new safety systems that were closed after Fukushima, but is actually building new reactors in Japan, and is working on being an exporter too, and supplies in the industry. And in the US, we're seeing massive legislation to help keep the existing reactors open and help fund and support new technologies like Lightbridge that are getting support from the government. So these include the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, which are bringing massive amounts of money to support nuclear, the kind of things that we used to only see Russia and China do to support energy technologies, now being done in the United States as well. And the companies that receive this funding are companies that help meet U.S. strategic goals, U.S. government goals. And these include employment, including in new industrial facilities, energy security, meet climate goals. They also include helping our allies wean off reliance on Putin and helping the U.S. maintain and then build its position in the global nuclear power industry. Because if you're not the exporter, if you're leaving the field to Russia and China, not only are you having the countries that buy the reactors much more dependent on Russia and China and not having as much of a relationship with the United States, but you don't have a seat at the table in those countries on the standards for nuclear safety, security, non-proliferation in the countries where the Americans are working and deploying the technologies. There's Americans in the offices of the nuclear power program. There's Americans in the plants. There's Americans throughout the system. And you really know everything that's going on. And where it's a Russian or Chinese project, it's more black box as to what's going on to the Americans. And it's a lot of dependence on Russia and China from those countries for their energy supplies. And this sort of race that's happening around the world on advanced nuclear technology and countries looking into it is an opportunity for companies like Lightbridge that can help the U.S. win. And these are long-term relationships. You know, you'll see hydroelectric dams in the U.S. now coming up on 100 years of operation, and a lot that will as we come up on the anniversary of those deployed under FDR during the Depression next decade. And nuclear is like that. We're having reactors being relicensed to run up to 80 years. And some will be licensed to run longer. A lot of the equipment in those plants get replaced over that period of time, but under that concrete dome within that facility, we're seeing these things run much longer than people thought they originally would when they thought they'd run for 40 years. And it's being more and more accepted around the world that these are 100-year plants in many cases. So these are 100-year strategic relationships that the United States gets or doesn't get with many countries. And with these contracts often come long-term fuel supply contracts, long-term service contracts, long-term cooperation in all kinds of areas between the U.S. and these other places, as well as U.S.-based manufacturing jobs. So what we're doing at Lightbridge is we reimagined fuel from scratch for reactors. And this design we came up with runs 1,000 degrees Celsius, about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit cooler in the reactors than the current fuels, bringing significant safety advantages, even while producing more power and running longer in the reactors. These are some of the rods we've produced for what's called thermal hydraulic testing. These are about 1 meter long, and this is high temperature, high pressure testing. A lot of this work is done in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Energy at its Idaho National Laboratory. It's operated by Battelle Corporation for DOE as a contractor. The rods get put together into what's called fuel assemblies that go in the core of the reactor. That's a mock-up of a Lightbridge fuel assembly that was actually used for some thermal hydraulic testing. And we expect that as the industry is moving toward growth based on improved economics to do that in competition with other energy sources, that in particular, the greater power output the Lightbridge fuel gives the same reactor and running longer, so the reactor is not shut down for refueling as often and is generating revenue more, that will give this fuel a leg up. This is a cross-section looking inside one of the rods and the different zones within it. We can get into a bit, but these zones bring some of the benefits that the fuel has, including this displacer going down the center line, like the lead down the middle of a pencil, that helps keep the center of that fuel 1,000 degrees cooler Celsius than the existing fuel. We invented the fuel, we invented the method to produce the fuel, and you'll see some upcoming announcements of how that's going at Idaho National Laboratory, which is quite good. Right now, if you go to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission's website, you'll see some statements about Lightbridge fuel from the NRC, including significant increase in fuel thermal conductivity compared to ceramics, promotes lower operating temperatures, complete retention of fission products means no burst of these products upon cladding failure, and supports higher power and longer fuel cycles. So you're getting the good stuff you want out of nuclear and avoiding the bad is what we've been designing it for. And designing it for fabrication, for operations, using modern materials in something very unique, very innovative in this industry. The nuclear industry has a very high capacity factor, meaning the percentage of full power that the plant produces if you look at it on a year-round basis. So nuclear in the United States produces 92.7% of the power as if the reactors were to run 24/7 every day of the year without ever derating in power at all or ever shutting down for maintenance or refueling. And that's just much more than anything else. It's actually surprising to a lot of people when they look at capacity factors of some other sources and how even coal and natural gas just often aren't there when you need the most because of freezing up wellheads and reasons why it just can't be delivered when you need it most in extreme storms. And it's nuclear that's really allowed a lot of people in Texas to survive and other places where they just lost all the other means of generation. And as we're moving toward more and more extreme weather events around the world, we're hearing more stories of, but for the nuclear we deployed, we wouldn't have had our hospitals operating or other necessary facilities. But 92.7 is good, but the industry is looking to improve it. And from our work with the utilities, we think Lightbridge fuel will be a part of that as we start running toward longer fuel cycles and power increases. We're going to actually be able, we think, to improve that 92.7% and pull away even more from some of these other energy sources. So some of our recent developments is on the right side is signing a contract over at COP28 in Dubai last month with Centris Energy with its CEO, Dan Poneman, where we're doing a front-end engineering and design study to deploy a pilot-scale plant to make our fuel for commercial reactors at their site in Ohio, pictured on the left there, that was a key part of the Manhattan Project. And Centris is a direct descendant of part of the Manhattan Project, where, as you know, the design of the bomb was based mostly at Los Alamos in New Mexico, and the plutonium was produced in Hanford, Washington, and the high enriched uranium piped in Ohio, partly, and in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. But it was Centris that really comes out of the Manhattan Project and is still going to be enriching uranium, and we're looking at co-locating a plant to make our fuel next to where they're going to be enriching uranium on that site in Ohio. We also recently signed a study in Romania where we're doing a study on a kind of a niche kind of reactor called CANDUs that are all the reactors in Canada, but also in Romania, India, Argentina, several other countries to be able to use our fuel. We have what's called a strategic partnering project with Idaho National Laboratory to finish developing this fuel and test and demonstrate it in the advanced test reactor at Idaho National Laboratory in that picture. We also have support from DOE for the Nuclear Energy University programs at MIT and at Texas A&M University, demonstrating our fuel for its benefits in these small modular reactors. This is a picture inside the advanced test reactor in Idaho. And with the results we're getting there, we're prioritizing which types of reactors we'll look to produce the fuel for first commercially and deploy to first. This is about our program. It's funded by DOE at Texas A&M. A bit of the timeline since we first came up with the concept of this fuel through to today and going forward a little bit. where we're going to be making and testing the fuel in the advanced test reactor. And with that, I'll look forward to your questions, your comments, but here's our contact information, and feel free to reach out to us at any time. And thank you very much.
Let me get you a mic.
Thank you. That was an excellent, very interesting speech. Question, with all this growth of reactors, have they figured out a good way to dispose of the fuel that has been used?
So in France, which is going to be building now a large number of reactors, they are reprocessing the spent fuel, which is dissolving it, in chemicals, and reusing the uranium to make new fuel, and reusing the small amount of plutonium that's produced also to be used to generate energy in the new fuel in countries that France exports nuclear fuel to, like the UK. It actually takes back that spent fuel and reprocesses it there. And the little teeny amount that's left that they don't reuse, they vitrify into glass logs and bury underground. And there's one room in France with all the nuclear waste in the history of the country is under the floor in that room. It's really a very tiny percentage that they don't reuse. In Scandinavia, countries have gone forward with siting high-level waste repositories, either underground or under the seabed. Well, they'll store it, and these could be retrievable where they'll reprocess it. And among the new types of reactors on that right side of the chart I showed you are some that are called fast reactors. And the fast reactors are being designed to use the waste from the current reactors. And you'll have a ratio, something like 1 fast reactor for every 8 current reactors or every 13 current reactors, depending on the design. But it looks like the fast reactors will actually use as their fuel the waste from the current reactors. But mostly what's happening, like at Millstone, is the fuel goes into a spent fuel pool at the site. And then after cooling there, it goes into dry cask storage at the site. And in these above ground dry cask storage, these concrete casks that really there's no danger from them, a space about this large, it could hold, easily all of the spent fuel, from the history of that plant. But eventually the Department of Energy, by law, is supposed to take all that away. It's owned by DOE. And they're supposed to take it away, and whether they put it into a high-level waste repository like was considered at Yucca out in Nevada, or reprocess it like France is doing, or use a more new modern reprocessing technology like some of the U.S. national labs are working on, to be determined. But right now it's very safely stored at all of those sites.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a big supporter of nuclear power. What I don't understand is why the Greens don't support it. They're against fossil fuels, and yet they're against clean nuclear plants. Can you explain, please?
Well, unfortunately for those that have those positions, they're really against economic development and growth in a lot of places where it's just not working out without having those sources on the grid. Now, there are some environmental organizations like Greenpeace in Europe that are steadfast in opposition to nuclear power, and the Sierra Club in the United States. And there's some that have changed. And there are some individuals who've left those groups and become very active in supporting nuclear power. But we're seeing the biggest difference is age. And the Greenpeace members in Europe who are steadfast and not changing, tend to be older. And the younger people tend to be much more supportive. And there's an 18-year-old Swede, Ia Anstut, and she is leading a national effort in Sweden against Greenpeace in Sweden and across Europe. and she's getting a lot of traction. And in particular, politicians are getting concerned about younger generations really not understanding their energy policy when the only alternative is fund Putin and don't meet climate goals.
Seth, thank you so very much. Excellent presentation. I'd like to have a minute with you afterwards because my last job in advertising was to keep Indian Point open for 20 years.
Okay.
Here's the question. This town voted against cell towers. This town voted against having Indian Point open. This town wouldn't allow, siting is a real problem. And if we can't even put up a cell phone tower, how are we going to have a small new modular reactor?
You know, NIMBY has really gotten to be much more than people don't want a prison in their communities. We're seeing communities don't want a little league field or a soccer field. They don't want a courthouse. Some don't even want a new school. And what's interesting is this town and some other towns that vote against nuclear are largely powered by nuclear and like having the low electric bills and the clean air. And if you go to places like New Delhi, that are powered, by coal, and you can't see the sky and your throat hurts trying to breathe, you really appreciate the clean air. And what I'd say is a saving grace for nuclear on why you have a town like New Canaan that voted against nuclear, powered by nuclear, is something called energy density. That nuclear has about a 3 million to 1 advantage over anything else of how much energy you produce from the amount of fuel material. It's just amazing how much energy you produce from so little. So these little sites produce massive amounts of energy. So a lot of people live in areas powered by nuclear and never see a nuclear plant. They don't even know the power is from nuclear because it's one pretty small site that seems pretty well hidden that's powering it. So even these small reactors are pretty big. A lot of those small ones are 300 megawatts electric each, about a third of one of the reactors at Indian Point, and they could power a region of Kentucky and other places that are looking at having them. So I think a saving grace for nuclear is New Canaan might say it doesn't want a nuclear reactor, but it takes nuclear power. And if Dominion adds a small modular reactor to the Millstone site, there'll be even more nuclear power here without getting a nuclear reactor here. Now voting against or, not having a vote, but not supporting, say, keeping the Indian Point reactors open, hurts that. But I'd say a lot of the onus is on the nuclear power industry that, like we've been very successful with younger people, we have to explain the differences in the technology, show how safe this is, and convince people. And right now, there's a lot of success, particularly, I'd say, in other countries, but also in the U.S. in doing that.
Seth, we have a Zoom member who would like to ask a question. Dick Troy, can you unmute your mic and you can ask the question?
Question has been asked and answered. Thank you.
Oh, that was easy.
Thanks, Dick. Thanks, Dick.
I have two questions in the back. The first is PBR, and the second one is the future of Manresa, about 8 miles away. PBR was in the wind, subject of a lot of articles in Wired magazine, Popular Mechanics, about 20 years ago. I just looked it up on the phone, but pebble bed reactors. And they described it. They said, let 1,000 reactors bloom. Mm-hmm. And there was a story about the fact that this technology was ready, and countries like China were ready to deploy small modular reactors, one in every town. They were low temperature, just like you've described, mm-hmm. low risk. Mm-hmm. There was no NIMBY factor in China. They just do what they want to do. So that was in 2003. Yeah. They predicted that this wave was coming. And in countries like China, which are energy dependent, what got in the way? Why is it
Yeah.
taking so long?
Well, the pebble bed reactor was worked on at a lab called Jülich in Germany, and then it was picked up in South Africa and worked on for many years there. And Westinghouse supported that and worked on it in Pittsburgh area, and what was then Exelon, now Constellation Energy, supported that, and it's been carried on by one of the companies on that table I had up there called X-Energy. All right, thank you. Sorry for the loss there for people on Zoom for a second. So the pebble bed reactor is being carried on by a company called X-Energy based in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C., and it's one of the competing technologies. And I'd say that one of the reasons why you sort of have a gap in years between the time period you're talking about and X-Energy seriously working on now, and X-Energy is making progress. They're the company with the contract with Dow to deploy those reactors to power chemical plants on the Texas Gulf Coast. Those would be pebble bed reactors from X-Energy. But I think it was fracking and for other reasons why natural gas came down in price, and that what looked like a price point that you had to meet to penetrate the market just wasn't going to be the case. And I think that American natural gas has been a big success story, but also a reason why some other what became more expensive technologies got delayed. But Admiral Rickover, who really led development of a lot of these reactor technologies in the Naval Reactors Program for the United States, he wrote a famous paper about how an academic reactor or a paper reactor that's not yet deployed is always cheap, it's always small, it's always going to be built on schedule, but a real reactor that's actually now starting to run is bigger, it's more expensive, it takes longer, it has something leaking that you have to fix. And I think that part of what goes to your question is a lot of these companies were kidding themselves that they thought it was going to be like the first part of Rickover's paper. These things were going to be so cheap, so easy to develop, so easy to deploy. And it turns out it takes a lot longer and is a lot more complicated and more expensive to deploy a new kind of reactor than you thought it would be.
The second question is Manresa, only on the Norwalk coast. It was one of 6 power plants shut down about 10 years ago. A couple months ago, it was sold, and that seems to suggest that we're moving away from a centralized approach. Is it possible that we're going to refit places like that, which are on the grid, with nuclear, or do you think we're going to move to a even further decentralized approach where New Canaan, Wilton, Darien, each one of us has our own little tiny reactor?
I think that for baseload power to power St. Mark's Episcopal Church and your homes and local businesses, it's going to be the electric grid. That it's going to remain just cheaper, more economical to have large power plants. And my personal belief is that the more what they call distributed power, the locally produced power, is going to be more expensive and for a specific need like powering the hospitals and military bases, critical infrastructure like data centers that will pay more for the energy to get them, until and unless these smaller plants do become cheaper, which is just not the case now. And it actually is cheaper for New Canaan to have its own plant than to rely on the grid. I don't believe we're going to see that happen.
We'll take one more over here, then we'll let Seth go home, I think.
Thank you. So obviously there's different other technologies like fuel cell technology that are assisting like manufacturing sites and things of that nature that may not be as feared as opposed to nuclear type sites? And how are you competing against those other alternatives for modular energy? And then also, as far as nuclear power is concerned, I think a lot of people may be more concerned about when things aren't going right, such as all the volatility that's going on in the world, that a lot of these modular nuclear sites are vulnerable to some type of attack and therefore a disaster that may occur. And as we all know, when something goes wrong with a nuclear facility, there are, devastating effects. How are the modular technologies, kind of taking a look at that and, taking care of that situation?
Yes. So on the first question, I'd say that we need a diversified portfolio of energy sources, that we should not rely too much on any one source. And I think nuclear is going to be growing within that diversified energy base, but you actually need a diversity of sources for many reasons on who you're relying on for critical elements, all sorts of things. And I think that, for example, most fuel cells, run most efficiently on hydrogen, and it's very expensive to produce. As I said, it looked like some of these newer, more high-temperature reactors will more cheaply produce high-temperature heat energy used to produce hydrogen. And actually, the cheaper way to produce fuel cells would be with nuclear in that supply chain. And I think it's that way with some other energy sources too. So some of these are very interrelated. And as for the second question, first of all, I would push back a little bit. Nobody died at Fukushima, and nobody was hurt. Those were industrial facilities that were destroyed in a record-breaking earthquake and tsunami, along with large numbers of industrial facilities up and down that coast of Japan, and in many of the other reactor sites up and down that site, which handled it better than Fukushima did. There were big problems that accident should never have happened at Fukushima, even in that earthquake and tsunami, and that's what the Japanese official report says, which starts with the sentence, Fukushima was an accident made in Japan by Japanese people. But many nuclear plants up and down that coast were where people sheltered. They went into the nuclear plants with the earthquake and tsunami to stay safe from the flooding. And at 3 Mile Island, nobody died, nobody was hurt, and the identical plant ran for decades on the same site right next door. Kept running in the United States. So they got a lot of press, and movies like Godzilla, scare people, and the China syndrome. But I'd say these newer technologies, from Lightbridge fuel and these big reactors to some of these small reactor designs, some of which are below grade, really, really do bring safety to the level that literally it looks like the NRC will agree. If you live across the street, you're not in an evacuation zone. That they have such safe systems and so contain it all within the structure that it's amazingly safe. Now, the United States has more nuclear reactors at sea than it has on land, in our aircraft carriers and our submarines. And these submarine reactors, they have to perform at full power just when you need them most to save your life and propel that ship and power that ship, such as if a Russian depth charge turns that ship over, makes it flip in the water. That reactor is operating upside down just when you need it most. These reactors are incredibly robust systems. They can do things nothing else can. So yes, safety is always number one in the nuclear power industry. We focus most on it. And that's why we're developing new technologies like Lightbridge is doing. But it's already, I think if you looked at the statistics, you would find it's the safest large industry in the history of the United States. Nobody has ever died from radiation in the history of the U.S. nuclear power industry. Not one person. I'll end with that, and I really want to thank you and Jerry for the introduction and Roger for all the help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth.